Hello everyone, welcome to Java Tutorials. My name is Kishore. In this video, we will discuss about the final keyword. The purpose of a final keyword is to create constants or to restrict overriding or to restrict inheritance. You can apply final keyword on variables, which could be on instance variables or static variables or local variables. If you apply it on variables, it is going to become constant and you cannot modify its value. If you apply it on methods, then you cannot override the final method. You can inherit, but you cannot override. You can call that method, you can inherit that method, but you cannot override the final methods. If you apply the final keyword on classes, then you cannot inherit that class. Sometimes you do not want certain classes to be inherited. You want that class to be the last class in the hierarchy of the inheritance. You can make that class as a final class. There are a lot of inbuilt classes which are final. You can take a class called string class. Let me show you. If I use Control Shift T, you can search for the class you want. Look at this class string. It is showing the final keyword, right? Which means you cannot extend the string class. But let us search for object class, which is the topmost class in Java. It is not final because every class is a subclass of object. So that way you can actually create final classes. There are some rules you should follow whenever you create final variables, like the moment you declare, you have to initialize. Suppose I have a class called employee and I will declare one final variable like static final company name equals, I would write, I need to provide the data type ABC company. This company name is declared final. It is static and final. You cannot actually modify the value of company name anywhere. Suppose I write one static method public static void set company name and let me take the company name in the parameter and try to modify the company name equals to company name. Because the variable names are same, you should use the class name here because it is a static variable. You cannot use this keyword. You can use the class name. Look at the error. It says final field cannot be assigned. But let me remove the final keyword. Will it work? Yes, it is working. So you cannot modify the value of final variables. I applied it on static variable. Then I can also create one final variable like this. Say int something like id equals to 0, but I will make this one as final. You might be wondering, why did I write final for id? I don't want this id to be modified. For that reason, I wrote final for the id. But how do I change the value of id? At the time of object creation, you can change it. You need to understand final variables can be initialized in the constructor so that every time you create the object of this employee class, you can provide a different value to the ID, but only once you need to initialize. So if you do not initialize, it will give error. What you can do is you can create a constructor. Let me create a public employee constructor. I will just give one parameter ID and I write this dot ID equals to ID. Look at the statement. This dot ID equals to ID is not throwing any error. But what you need to understand is once the object of employee is created, ID will be initialized and you cannot modify that value id. It will become constant. For every object of employee, a separate copy of id will be created, correct? Let me write one setter method and see will it work if I try to modify through the setter method. id equals to id. It won't work. It will give an error. And if I comment this, still it won't work because you can initialize the final variable. If it is instance, it should be at the time of declaration or it should be in the constructor. I can write a getter method. Let me write get id and I return id. Let's create an object of employee by passing id and we will call the getter method inside the print statement so that I can see what is the id. id is 200. Let me create another object e2 by passing 300 and let me call e2.getId. In that case, you would see e2.getId returning 300. So you can use final variables to create constants, but you can use final variable on instance variable as well as on static variable. But static variables you must initialize at the time of declaration, or you can also use static initialization block. You have to either initialize inside the static initialization block or at the time of declaration. Suppose if I do not initialize, you will get an error. But still you can initialize in the static initialization block like this. Company name equals ABC company. Like this you can initialize. Only in two places you can initialize the final variable, but it should be static variable. Then you can initialize in the static initialization block. If it is instance variable, you can initialize either in the constructor or at the time of declaration. And there is one more place where you can initialize, that is IIB, that is called as instance initialization block, which we discussed very long back. You can just go and watch that instance initialization block video. So you can either initialize at the time of declaration or inside the constructor or in IIB. Let me show you. This is just to show you that final instance variables can be initialized either in IIB or constructor or at the time of declaration. If I just remove this or comment it, let me write an instance initialization block like this. Maybe after the constructor or before constructor you can write, and you can write id equals to 200 simply like this. Notice there is no error. But what happens is every object will have the same id. That is the problem. What you can do is you can use this IIB to generate some sequential value, and that ID will always get some sequential value for every new object because this IIB is invoked every time you create the object. So this is what about the final variable. Next is about the final methods. Let us discuss about the final methods. Let me remove all these things. Final methods you cannot override. Suppose I have one method here, public void something called set name, which has to initialize the name, and I do not want that to be overridden. Maybe I have this dot name equals to name, and let me declare the name variable to get rid of the error. I will write private string name and I will write get name. I do not want anyone to override the set name method after they extend employee class. In that case, I can make this final. Suppose there is a class called manager, which is also an employee, which extends employee class, and it tries to override set name like public void set name by passing a parameter. And anyways, it can invoke super dot name. If it tries to modify the name by overriding the set name, it is going to again give an error. You cannot override the set name method, but you can always invoke the set name. It is possible. It is inherited. What I will do is I will create the object of employee, new employee, and I will pass some name e dot set name Raj, and we will print the name here. Name equals to e dot get name. You can call the set name method. It is inherited also. You can create a manager object like this, new manager, and e dot set name is going to call the set name on the manager object. The inherited method only it will call, and the name is Raj. But you cannot override. One more thing is, if you make the class final, you cannot inherit. So that is what the restriction of final class, the restriction of final method, and the restriction of final variables. That is what we understood from this video. See you in the next video. Thank you so much.